Without further ado, let's go ahead and welcome your moderator to this panel, Stephanie Rizzo.
Hi, guys. My name is Stephanie Rizzo. I'm a staff writer here at Full Sail for Platinum Creative. And I'd like to welcome you guys to the Power Storytelling panel. It's a packed house. Look around. This is great. Welcome. So I would like to introduce our panelists. First up, we have Robin Cowie. Give it up for Hall of Famer Troy DeVold. And also Hall of Famer Jeff Unai. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hi.
Bonjour.
So just to start us off, if we could just maybe starting with Jeff, go down the line, and if you could briefly describe what you do and more importantly, why you do it.
Ooh, why do it? So, is this on? Do you hear that? Oh, okay. Hi, my name is Jeff Unai. I'm directing and producing a documentary feature right now. It's called Gray Water, and the film is supported by the Sundance Institute and Tribeca Film Institute as well. And why I do it? Because I'm crazy about storytelling.
I do what I do because I have a cat that likes to eat. I've been in the reality television business for 16 years. It was something that I had not anticipated getting into, but that I fell in love with rather quickly, just because I enjoy being able to tell stories about actual people. That is why I do what I do. I am currently working on trying to find my next gig. I have a brief moment between things. I'm also getting ready to gear up. I have a book coming out on reality television on June 1st, so I'm sort of ramping up to that as well.
My name is Rob Cowie. I am a producer, director, writer. I've worked mostly in feature films, but I also do TV, and I have a philanthropic organization called the Orlando Story Club that every month does an event to raise money for a different charity every month using storytelling. And I do it because I have to. It's like
That's
water.
the best answer.
It's like eating.
Yeah.
I have no other choice. I'm addicted.
So that leads me into our first question or topic. We're going to start broad and then maybe narrow down if that's okay with you guys. People have been telling stories for thousands of years, and it has been said, perhaps erroneously so, that all of the best stories have been told and that as human beings we kind of tell the same stories over and over again. Do you guys feel like that's an accurate statement? And do you feel like there are any stories that have not been told? Because as a culture, we're constantly changing, right?
Right.
So.
I think it sounds like a clever thing to say that all of the great stories have already been told. I can tell you from watching Amazon's Transparent that that is not true. There are lots of really amazing stories out there. Most of them are still variations on the themes that we all know and love. You know, Joseph Campbell talks a lot about the hero's journey, as does Chris Vogler, and I think that, you know, every story is made new by the participants in that story. Your reception of the story changes with the retellings of the same thing told by different people. Many versions of the same story are made unique by the people who share them, so I do not believe that that is an accurate statement.
So how do you lend fresh perspective to a narrative?
Yep.
I think that at the core of storytelling is humans, and humans basically run on conflict and emotion, not necessarily in that order. And so all stories tie into things that are kind of primal to the human condition. So that's fairly timeless, but the form changes a lot. I think when we did Blair Witch, it was the right time for that form to come about, but the idea behind the story, the conflict that happened behind the kids, or the emotions or fears that they were feeling were pretty universal. It's just that we came up with a form that really wasn't the first time of the execution of that form. There'd been that execution of that form before. It was just that form came into the zeitgeist at the right time. So I think the way that you keep things fresh is stay to the core of human emotions and human conflict, but get really inventive on form and fashion.
Yeah, and I think just in response to all stories being told, storytelling is just, I mean, when you have a conversation with anyone, whether it be someone that you just met or you've known for a long time, as you're talking, all you're doing is telling each other stories. If all stories were told, then we would stop talking to each other. I mean, that's the way we communicate. And the stories that I connect to, and the stories that, they're all just really personal stories. And the things that I work on now, even if I'm working in nonfiction or fiction, a lot of it just comes from wanting to tell your own personal story in just the most creative way, I guess. Yeah.
So, Robin, you hit on something about the form being super important when you're trying to tell a story, and that, that goes along with like moments in culture. How are some emerging mediums? How are they changing the way we tell story? Things like VR, AR, or even, transmedia. Changing the way we
I mean, I think we're all very familiar with, as kind of aspiring storytellers and aspiring technology people in a creative field, we're all very familiar with a lot of the technologies that are emerging. But I think before you talk about capture devices, I think you need to, explore communication devices. And again, going back to humans and how humans communicate, obviously the impact of computers and the internet and mobile has completely reshaped the way that we interact with each other, not only as communicators, but just as humans in general. So what does that do to globalization? What does that do to social relationships? What does that do to mobilization? What does that do to, when you get up in the morning, what does the average person do today that 200 years ago, when they got up in the morning, it was a lot different? So, you can talk about virtual reality, and you can talk about, all the different kinds of communication tools that are coming up, kind of paintbrushes that we can use. But I think that a lot of times as storytellers, we really need to be hyper aware of what the everyday person is interacting with in their life.
I think the advancing technology is a lot like walking from the 3-foot side of a pool into the 6-foot side of a pool. Is your immersion level may grow deeper, but you are still standing in water. I don't know about you, but I've read books recently, and it doesn't matter to me if I have a book on paper or if I have a book on a Kindle. A story is a story, and it requires my imagination and my engagement. I think that very often the newness of technology is misused because we're so interested in showing off the capability of the technology that we're ignoring the fact that a story needs to be told.
Yeah, I think that's been one of my most exciting things doing this story club, is it's people standing up and telling a story, 5 minutes or less, and it's stripped away all the other artifices, and it's just purely, based on that person's window and perspective. And it's been really, for me personally, it's been very invigorating watching people being able to do that.
And a lot of times when people talk about these new technologies coming out, you get this sense that people are worried that movies will stop being made. Like, oh no, then, people will stop making films. I mean, last year there's more films being made now than ever before. I think it's more just the way films are reaching its audience, its target audience, is just changing. And yeah, bring on the new technologies.
Yeah.
Doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
and I think, again, because of computers, the bits and pieces are becoming really interchangeable. I'm working right now on a computer game, and that computer game has so many more film components in it. In fact, the reason why I'm working on the game is that they needed somebody who had film experience.
Right.
So I think all of these technologies are converging, and so
Yeah.
it kind of makes the, what tool conversation kind of irrelevant.
We're all just trying to connect with each other. That's all it is. Yeah.
Jeff, you mentioned connection. So if we pull back a little bit, when you guys are walking around in the world, how do you stay open and receptive to good material, possible stories? I know, Jeff, you met the subject of your film at the gym.
Yes. So the first part of the question was, how do you stay kind of open to finding these stories? We all have our own story, I mean, the things that we connect with, and each and every one of us is sitting, or has the most important story ever told by my man. Each and every one of us has that story, and it's a hell of a story. And I think once we, figure that out, or once you realize that, it's super exciting to know that you're holding the most amazing story that's ever been told, each and every one of us. So I think that's just kind of how I see it. I think we all go through our own life experiences as a young child all the way till now, and if we can use those experiences in a creative way and in a way to connect with people, emotionally, then I think that's all we're trying to do. Yeah.
I find the best stories in places where I've had no prior interest. When I've watched everything there is to watch in the documentary category on Netflix, and the one thing that I've been avoiding because I don't think I'm going to enjoy it is a story that just kind of comes out of the blue and gets me. Recently, for me, that was a documentary called Supermensch about a guy who was a manager. A wonderful documentary.
Yeah.
Just not only about the guy and his accomplishments, but his approach to living and how people should interact with each other. I'm more receptive, I think, to story and to new things. And when I find people that I want to get together with to try to pitch reality shows about them or their situation, or in the rare case when I would like to, go in the documentary direction, I don't necessarily think about how it's going to be received by anyone else. I think the thing we are trained to do is to second guess what the market is going to want. In documentaries and certain types of storytelling, obviously there are some things that people are more interested in than others, but the art of telling that story in a way that you're getting to know something that you have not encountered before, surprise is the only thing I'm looking for. If I meet someone and I find out that their life is a total surprise, I talk about Allie Willis nonstop in these events. I have never met another human being that I find more interesting and more deserving of being the center of a documentary topic. And she is not someone that most people know. I met her incidentally. She was mentioned to me by Lily Tomlin, and I just thought I would seek her out, and she has become the most fascinating person I know. It's the element of surprise. It's looking at someone who is, in her mid-60s with an asymmetrical haircut and thinking, there's a story behind that person, I wonder what it is, and finding out that it's just this trove of awesome. Being open to surprises and looking for the unexpected. The most boring people in the world have the most amazing reasons behind why they're boring.
Yeah, we're all infinitely complex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you asked kind of two questions. One was how do you stay fresh, and the other one is how do you decide what you're going to make? And to me, they're completely opposite questions. I'm a freaking content junkie. My wife gives me a terribly hard time because I'm a podcast junkie, I'm a reading junkie, I'm a theater junkie, a music junkie, a film. I love experiencing stories. So I think that I just do that. I just consume a lot. When it comes to what I make, it has to have the basics of story. Like it has to be compelling, and it has to be good material. But I find, and this is an unfortunate statement, that increasingly so, what I make has to be strategic based on ultimately what I want to do. So if I want to make a TV series, well, there's just got to be certain elements from a producer's perspective that have got to line up, and it has to be a good story. So there's just a practical logic to that. Just being passionate about story does not make you a producer. They're kind of separate.
So to that end, you find a story that you want to tell. What next?
I mean, for me as an independent filmmaker, I just believe in not getting permission. Just do it. I was just talking on a panel earlier about being multifaceted and whatnot. And has anyone seen the film Tangerine?
Yeah.
Yeah, iPhone, right? Like, no more excuses. Yay! Oops. I mean, that's when you realize, who really wants to make a film and who's just talking about making a film. For me, if I'm really passionate about a story, screw it, man. Just make it. No excuses in any form. Just make it. And yeah, that's my take.
You know what's always funny to me about that is I always hear people say there are no excuses not to do something, and it gets to the point where it's almost a cliche, like, man, you can do it, just put your mind to it, just do it.
Yeah.
The reason it's a cliche is because it's true, and as many times as you hear it, it doesn't make it any less true.
Yep.
So don't ever write that off as some surface level of advice.
And the excuses of, oh, I don't have a budget and all that stuff. Those are real. Those are real concerns. I totally get it. But you can make something to move forward to make that film that is going to be the next Avatar 9 or whatever. Make steps forward. Make the films that you're able to make right now, and just keep moving forward. I mean, that's just been my mentality. I work at Valve, and I had in 2010 I had a 5D, and there was a first ever $1 million video game tournament, and I just went down and shot it with my own camera and with a super small crew, and then 2.5 years later, it ended up with a documentary feature and released online through Valve, and it had 5.5 million views. And I guess point is that when I started that project, it was about young 20-year-old video gamers that I didn't know how many people would be interested in that. I didn't know, but it was a film that immediately I connected with the subjects, and they told incredibly personal stories, and you just take it day by day, and yeah, you just hope to serve their stories the best way possible, and you don't know what the market is going to say, right? That film did very well. You don't know what the market's going to say, but if you believe in it, there's no stopping you these days. So.
Yeah, I guess I had a different evolution of it, and I mean, definitely when we were straight out of film school and before Blair, we'd do anything, and then when Blair hit, obviously that gave us leverage to do other things.
Yeah, that film did pretty well too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that gave us leverage to do other things. So then you were like, okay, well, now I want to do a TV series, and then I want to do a bigger budget film, and then and so actually, kind of for 15 years, we got more and more specific about the things we wanted to do, and then for personal reasons, I ended up having to completely step away from everything, and I found my creative self again when I completely stepped away from trying to achieve something specific, and went back to basic storytelling. But now, I'm doing events and computer games and marketing stuff again, and I'm going back finally now to develop a TV series, but I stepped away from like trying to force something really specific. So like I would advise people, like, if there's something specific that you want to get done, that's cool, but understand there's a certain set price to getting there. And so I found I was so much happier as a creative person when I just opened myself up to whatever was going to come, So it's been a whole kind of cycle for me.
So let's talk about building trust with subjects. I know that Jeff and Troy, you guys work in more reality-based medium. You're a documentary filmmaker, you're a reality television producer. So your subjects are trusting you to tell their story in a way that is responsible but also compelling. Robin, as a producer of independent films, you have people that are coming to you to make their vision a reality. So how do you guys mitigate your artistic inclinations versus what a subject might feel like a way they want their story to come off?
Well, I can tell you that with reality television, almost 50% of my job on the occasions when I'm in the field instead of working from the post team, building trust with your subject is more a matter of letting them in on what your process is, and also not overthinking things in the moment. If someone begins to cry in an interview because it hits an emotional nerve with them or they're thinking about something else, the initial instinct is, well, you know, I want to protect them, I want to shut the camera off. But seeing them convey a real emotion can completely change how people feel about them if it's genuine in the moment. So gather things, don't judge yourself so much when you're doing it. But tell them, you know, the purpose to what it is you're doing. I worked on a show not that long ago where the participants in the show were first-year residents at a medical institution who were very concerned about how they would come off. And most of the discussion I had with them before they signed was I wanted them to know this is how a reality television program works. You will sometimes be asked to do things not that are contrary to your nature, but because we need to be able to fill in a space from A to B, and it's part of the storytelling process. Let them feel like they can ask you questions. With documentaries, I'm sure that Jeff may give you slightly different, because people, I think, will alter themselves in ways that make them seem unnatural. And when you're with a person for an extended period of time, if they are self-producing in an unnatural way, they eventually either let their guard down or they change to the point where they're almost combative with you, and you can't resolve how that comes across in an end product because that individual has no continuity of character, and it suddenly becomes very unbelievable. It's like when you watch reality television shows, so many of them you say, this is the phoniest looking thing I've ever seen. Well, it's often phony because everyone on a reality show wants to be the center of the show and thinks that they're going to command the most attention by either behaving very poorly or attempting to portray themselves as a saint. And it alters their behavior, and you just can't have that. So letting people in on the process and telling them that being themselves is the most important part of the process is the first thing that I have to do.
Yeah, speaking of process, the way I'm making this film is quite different than the previous film that I had worked on. So I've been shooting this film for over 2.5 years, using no sit-down interviews, talking heads, voiceover narration, and it's just me following this guy, this guy that's 40 years old, and he, in secret from his family, is a cage fighter. And so if I were to sit down with him in interviews and ask him specific questions, he can tell, which he's a great storyteller, he can tell me these big elaborate stories of what's going on or how he feels. So I've chosen to just observe and follow him. And I mean, all we do is text on our phone, and he tells me what he's doing, and I just go over and I shoot with him and his family. So it's completely scene driven, and I'll be there for 7, 8, 9 hours with him and get about 5 hours of footage, and the first 4 hours I don't use. It's that last, or it's that last 20 minutes where it's not like they forget that I'm there, and I'm not shooting with one of these little GoPro cameras. I'm shooting with Red Epics, and my camera rig is this big. So it's not like I'm hiding, and it's the furthest thing from me hiding. They just quit caring, like I'm gonna be here. I'm here for the long run, the long haul, and I get what I get. And at some point, they just quit caring I'm there. So that's how I'm approaching this film.
Hey, I'd give a different take on trust than what you guys have. I remember when I came out of film school, especially in the early part of what I was doing, I would always try and control as much as I possibly could because I was a control freak, and I wanted it a certain way, and so I put out a lot of energy, like really, really working on that. And now I've been doing it for 25 years, and I don't know whether it's I have people that I've worked with for 10 years at sometimes, or whatever, or that I just try and hire people or work with people that I trust, and let them do their job, so that I have more time to concentrate on my job. And I think I've learned the job better and got a better appreciation for the job better, so that I really do trust people. The other thing is, when trust goes wrong, because it does, it sometimes actually generates a better situation. I used to really fear things going wrong, and in actual fact, sometimes when things go wrong, it actually generates some of the best opportunities, and thinking your way out of a corner is a lot of times creatively inspirational. We did a film in Texas where we had to have a character jump off a cliff, and it just wouldn't work. I mean, the location wouldn't work. It just looked like crap, and we ended up having to build this cliff, which was a major budget thing. But it was the best answer because the shot just looked so much better because we were forced into that solution, and that was the key shot in the trailer. It was like a major thing, and I would never have gotten into that situation unless things had gone wrong. So I'm not saying make things go wrong on purpose, but I think the more I've done it, I'm like, oh, okay, I see things going wrong as an opportunity, whereas before I was terrified of them.
So sometimes we've all been there. We've had projects that can go on months, years. So especially in the entertainment industry, things tend to take a long time in development. And so how do you stay connected to story for the long haul? And how do you keep the mechanics of the work from interceding with the emotional connection you feel to a story?
I can tell you that most of the time when I shoot, you're looking at a period of about 4 months to do an entire show. So it's not that hard to stay with something for that period of time. When I look at documentaries that have been shot over a period of 4 years or 9 years, that to me is outrageous. Like, I don't know how people manage to keep that focus, but I think maybe the key to that is to not be too rigid in your focus to the point where everything comes to the surface. Like when you combine oil and water, eventually there will be a separation. I went to a screening a couple years ago. There's a documentary called Cutie and the Boxer. Has anybody here seen that?
Yeah,
So
love that film.
it's beautiful, but the way the dynamic shifted between the two people that were the center of that documentary over the course of shooting is not something that anyone could have expected, and I'm absolutely certain was better than the story that the filmmaker intended, because he seemed in interview to be a bit at a loss for how everything came together. Nothing was really prodded along. It's just he realized this was the course of what was happening and just knew to follow it. You can always change things and distill things later, but if you stop something down and say, I'm choosing not to follow this, then you start to lose story. In reality television, we have a lot of dead ends. There are certain shows that are crazy efficient, like when we shot Basketball Wives. I would tell you we could go through a season of that show, and if we had 4 scenes that were shot that were unused at the end of that season, it would amaze me. Because every interaction that cast had was from the gut and felt very real to me, as amplified as those interactions appear on television because of the way that time is condensed. Everyone on that show had a very authentic interaction with each other. They followed as much as they set up in the field, as far as like, we're going to follow you today and hopefully you'll have a conversation about this thing that happened last Thursday. But Sean Rankin, who is a wonderful EP, makes room for reality to override whatever the plan is, and then just kind of let that plan morph as you go along.
Yeah, and as I'm filming, from usually a lot of the story with the way at least I've been approaching my film is the large majority of the writing is pretty much done when you meet the right person to film. And so if with my the subject of my film, just having a quick conversation of him telling me, hey, I'm almost 40, my family hates me fighting, but it's something that I really need to do right now because I'm going through a lot of pain in my life. My wife just recently became sick. She's my best friend. I don't know what else to do other than get punched and punch people. It's the only thing that makes him feel happy and makes him forget his pain. And when he told me, I really have maybe a year to do this and that's it. And immediately I went, you gave me an endpoint. Okay, how do you feel about me just following you? And he just, thankfully said, sure, and has let me completely let me into his home and into his life, and yeah, by the time I'm done filming, well, right now I have over 250 hours, and by the time I'm done filming, I'll probably have 300 hours. And if you think about the ratio of taking 300 hours and reducing it down to 90 minutes, it's crazy. But having said that, every month there's an outline that gets adjusted based on all the material that I'm capturing. I'll have a rough outline of when I start and go, wow, imagine if these things happened. This would be a cool story. This is the way it begins, and there's the middle, and here's how he resolves it, and here's the end. And every month, I'll just go through that outline based on the moments I'm capturing and just revisit that outline. And right now, this outline is a far, far better story than I could have ever possibly imagined, than when I started. So, to me, it's kind of like, it's just crazy. If you love big, massive jigsaw puzzles, then you'll probably like, documentary filmmaking. But if that absolutely horrifies you, then I'd stay clear of it. Yeah.
I think that, again, it's been an evolution for me personally. I've kind of become more obsessed with script writing than I ever thought I would be, and worked longer and longer and longer and harder and harder and harder on the script. And then, in a way, spend the rest of my time trying to throw that away and become more and more open to feedback. And feedback is really hard. I mean, I can remember, again, I hate to keep saying Blair, but in Blair, they wanted us to change the end of the movie, and we were completely broke. And it was going to take a bunch of time for them to get us money, but they were like, hey, if you change the ending, we'll pay you right now. And it literally was like, oh, well, that means we can eat and turn our lights back on. So we did. We went and shot the ending. I can probably say this now, but we purposefully shot really bad endings. so that so that they were completely unusable, but we could eat. we put the money in our, to get our lights back on.
Darn it.
So we were really closed off to outside feedback, period. I think that the other guys would say the same thing, that the older we've gotten, the more we've gotten open and receptive to feedback. But feedback is a really tricky thing, because every now and again you'll get somebody who's really expressive about how it makes them feel. But most of the times, it's not in what they're saying. It's either how they're saying, or the context of what they're saying, or the context of that compared to a number of other people, So I find that when you're evolving your edit, that you really have to be open to hear what people say and how they feel. And we certainly started doing our own test screenings and our own, things that were not executive driven, because. And that's not to say the executives don't have good feedback. Sometimes they do have good feedback, but they're always coming from a certain agenda. And everybody has an agenda when they're giving you feedback. But we did our own screenings because we really wanted to get better at listening and trying to address what it is. And sometimes it was like, well, it's actually something that's going on 6 minutes earlier than the issue that people are trying to have. And then the other part was getting feedback allowed us to constantly simplify. And we've tried to get more and more, simplified as we go along. So that's kept things fresh. That keeps the story alive, is by just opening yourself up to constantly getting feedback.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, before working in, before directing and producing my own films, I worked in the visual effects industry on, a handful of different films, and you really have to get good at taking feedback on just from every angle. So, you know what? I guess it's totally part of the process. Like you were kind of saying. And the more and more you can screen, the more feedback you get, I think you're just going to end up with a better product in the end.
Yeah, it's a weird fight though, because you want to be open and at the same time you want to have, so it's like you go back and
you don't
forth,
have to,
you
address
don't
the
have
feedback.
to take it. Yeah, exactly. If somebody
You can
gives
take
you
it.
a note, especially if you're an independent filmmaker,
Yeah.
you don't necessarily have to take that feedback.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, when you're doing network television, I mean, the worst experience of my life, we had 7 executives. It was a co-produced TV series.
That sounds like so much fun.
Oh my God! It was like a root canal in the morning and in the evening. I mean, It was wonderful. But I mean, trying to corral that, and that is a horrible way to make television. I mean, I don't know what your experience must have been like with
My experience is I've had marvelous experiences and terrible experiences.
Yeah.
I wrote a book this last year called And Another Thing. And it's a look at the television notes process and how it works.
It's awesome.
And I think that so many of us want to look at the notes process as being adversarial, when in fact you just don't really know what's motivating people to ask for the things that they're asking for. There may be things that don't make any sense to me as a note that I would understand completely if I knew that they had a telephone call from a major sponsor that said, we're worried that the show is getting a little bit tasteless or we're going too far in one direction. It's not that anyone's trying to rein us in just arbitrarily. It's, I have a sponsor that doesn't agree with this position on this show. I spoke on another panel earlier today where I mentioned that Steve Harvey, in an interview with Jerry Seinfeld, if you're watching Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, talks about how he apologized for something in his stage act or some joke that he had made, and Seinfeld was challenging him, and he's like, why would you apologize for that? And Steve Harvey says, because I have a talk show. Your business is trying to please as many people as you can. If you're an independent filmmaker and you're able to make as many choices as you can without having necessarily a direct sponsor for your product, in many cases, but not all, you can go in a lot of directions that I can't go in television, not only because there are people who have a need to give you notes in order to justify the position that they hold, but to service the people above and beyond them, up even to like the corporate overseers level. Norm Macdonald got fired from Saturday Night Live for making certain criticisms of people who were known to the head of the network. I wouldn't have anticipated that would create a reaction like that. But it did, and it cost him a position on a television show. The notes process is a super weird thing. And sometimes, on very rare occasion, I might ask when I get notes, is there a motivation for this note, or would you accept this halfway measure to address that note but not completely lose the story?
Yep.
Yeah, and then sometimes you get executives who are just brilliant, and they actually do contribute to the creative process in a really good way, so it goes all kinds of ways. Anyway,
If you would have
I feel
ended,
like we spiraled into a...
if you would have ended that on the word brilliant, I would not have known if you meant brilliant or
Well,
brilliant.
sometimes they're like, oh, this guy's brilliant.
Yes.
Yeah,
Master of his, her craft.
You just
I
hope
think
your
it's-
executive producers love and are completely passionate about storytelling. And,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I would like to apologize to everyone in the room, by the way, for what's happening with my headset, because it's like trying to put a paper clip on a watermelon.
It's like a it's like a spider.
It's like resting. Just don't move your head too much.
I have an abnormally large noggin, so I'm hoping it's not too distracting to people who are watching me touch myself every few seconds.
I think you guys have made some great points about feedback and being open and receptive to receiving it, but also fighting for what you believe in and trusting your own instincts. I think that's great for our students to hear. But also, if you can be that guy in the room or that girl in the room who reconnects maybe one of those executives with what they love about storytelling to begin with, helps them reconnect with that, that's another way to kind of send out pings into the world, see if people are receptive to that. If you can do that, then you're on the right track. So.
Yeah, I mean, not to bring it continually back to Story Club, but that's another one of the things that I love about theater or live comedy or live storytelling. You get this instant feedback. If a joke falls flat, it falls flat. If you get people's attention, they're with you and you can feel it. And I've just loved reconnecting to that, because oftentimes, in a film, I'll work on it for 3 years, and only at the end of the 3-year process, somebody goes, that sucked. You're like, oh, damn, I wish I'd known that 3 years ago.
That's why I work in television. It's just the immediacy of everything.
Yeah.
You can rip the bandage off and watch it 3 weeks later and just be on to the next episode.
Yeah. It's definitely, and live events are like that, or they're immediate. It's great. It's very, very gratifying.
So, in order to get ahead of it a little bit and make sure that you don't work on something for 3 years that is maybe not worth pursuing, what are some elements of a really good story? Maybe we can go down the line. You guys can each describe what's important to you in a good story.
You're talking about, 3 years. Yeah. We'll be finished with the film by the end of this year. So yeah, I'll be hitting more than 3 years. And I'm like, yeah. And as he said, he would, I'd only be filming him for 1 year. Here we are. The way I approach it in nonfiction is basically I just try to capture change, right? Like just capturing change with maybe with as much of change arcs, whatever you want to call them. If if my subject feels one way in the beginning of the film, and if I am filming for 1, 2, or 3 years and I feel like he still feels the same way about something, then I'm not really capturing change. So I should continue filming until I do notice that change, or maybe look at his story in a different way. But all you're trying to do is capture change from the beginning of the film to the end, and if you don't capture change, then what the hell are you doing? Yeah, and I don't know, I'm not saying characters have to change per se, well maybe I am, but something within the story has to change. If it's not the character that changes, then it's his world has to change,
Or you can affect change in the viewer.
Absolutely,
Right.
yeah, of course.
If your character stays static, if you're affecting change in your viewer, that's still a change.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the only real exception to that is if you're interested in sitcoms. Situation comedies, as just the nature of them, they have to be completely circular. You end every episode exactly where you started, so that those can be played in any order in syndication, and you don't lose things. You have some big A stories that last for the full season, like when Everybody Loves Raymond got down to the last couple of seasons, they decided that Robert would get married, and that sort of changed the dynamic of everything. Of course, that was the season that I had written, the spec script for them that didn't mention Amy at all. So throw that out the window.
How much of your life?
It takes a while to write a
Yeah.
good spec, especially when you're nervous like I am all the time. And that's why I work in reality TV and not sitcoms. But sitcoms are circular. It's a slightly different thing, so you don't always have a lot of change in the characters, although you will have stories that move for an entire season sometimes where that A story is very slowly advancing. I have nothing else to add because it was covered so beautifully there. So I would love to see what you come up with.
Surprise! No, I mean that is mine. That's it. Surprise.
Yeah.
That's all I got. I think that if humans are whatever, who knows? Humans are a lot alike. I mean, you can go back 200 years and there's a huge amount of things that are still the same, about us. But obviously there's elements that have changed. I think the thing that makes all forms of story gratifying is when you have a conflict where two forces are opposed and there's choices that can happen, and then the greatest joy is when something happens that you didn't expect, or the situation complicates it in a way that you didn't expect, and then something gets paid off that you didn't even see getting set up, or you visually experience something, and I would wrap that all up in this word surprise, and it might be as simple as Blair, where all of a sudden you're locked into a first-person point of view and you're forced to go through that thing. I mean, I think that's why that film was successful then and would not be successful now, is that people hadn't experienced that boxing you into that thing at that particular time. And so now it's boring, because we've experienced it. So I think the people who are making stories and content, I take it to as simple as a story or a novel. There's got to be a complication in it that is not predictable. And the moment something becomes predictable, and it can be the simplest setup, it can be the simplest situation, but have a complexity and a richness to it, and sometimes the surprises in the authenticity of it and the rawness of it. I think this year we've had a lot of really, really great films that have done that. I think it's been a great year for movies this year.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And my approach is, as I'm making documentaries or nonfiction narratives, as I like to kind of refer to them as, I'm not looking for truth. I don't really give a shit about truth. But what I care about is I care about emotional honesty, and that's all I care about. Yeah.
Do you know why Everybody Loves Raymond was such a success? Piggybacking on what he was talking about, every single episode of that show, Ellen Sandler, who wrote the TV Writers Workbook, said that the thing that works about Everybody Loves Raymond is that it has one theme that all of us identify with, and that is food and sex and how do we get them. And as silly as that seems as a premise, thematically, as a human being, those are all things that are very important to us. Like, how do we get relationships? How do we get food that doesn't suck? But it's again, you're just hitting people thematically in a way that the thing that understands them. And when you talk about how truth is not as important to you, I sort of agree with you. I think that story always trumps truth.
Yeah.
The truth sometimes is not as interesting as the lens with which we choose to view that truth through. So it's not a lie, it's truth through a lens.
Right. And our memories are imperfect anyways. So if you were not there to document the process, if your subject is telling the story, a year, 5 years, 10 years down the road, who's to say that that is accurate? It's not.
Exactly.
But what is accurate is the conveyance of the experience as a whole.
Correct.
So
Yeah, there are moments where I'm filming and what is happening within the scene between two people is far more emotionally powerful, or the emotional turmoil is far greater than me, some dude standing there in their living room, with a camera. When he walks into his home and his 13-year-old daughter, and I follow him into his home, and his 13-year-old daughter looks at him, and he's got a big black eye and a bloody lip, and she does not care. The children do not care about me being there. They care about their father and where he has been and why is he so hurt. No one even cares to look at the camera. yeah. So
So you guys gave some good examples of things that pull you into a story. What are some things that you've encountered as creatives that pull you out of story that you think are some mistakes people make?
pulls you out of story. Just being boring, I guess, is you definitely don't. Yeah, I think there's a tempo and there's a rhythm to a good story, and nothing has to be like super, plot. The plot doesn't have to be watertight or anything like that. I think a lot of times it's just there's a rhythm to a story that as long as you're not being boring, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get distracted by what I call beautiful shot-itis,
Oh yeah.
where, you're more interested in showing me the capabilities of your equipment than servicing the story. And it's really a lot more common than you think, because everybody wants to make something that looks majestic or registers with you on that level. The best content that I've ever seen is always shot in medium or close. I'm not necessarily that excited about watching someone walk across open desert in a 6-minute shot in beautiful widescreen. It's sort of like, I get it, he's in the desert. Show me a story, show me his face. Let me know he's sweating and miserable, or that he's laughing while he's doing something that would make everybody else miserable. Don't fall in love with, the beauty of the shot for the sake of the beauty of the shot.
Yeah, I mean, I like that beauty of the shot thing. I have a love-hate with Tarantino, more hate than love. And I love him because oftentimes his characters are so rich and so amazing, and he's a phenomenal writer. And I love all like Reservoir Dogs and True Romance and like that early writing that he does. And still, even now, like in his most recent movie, there's moments where I'm like, man, this guy's a freaking genius. And the other times I just want to beat him with a stick, because he's just like, he's so showy and he's so referential and he's so technically brilliant as far as like all his stuff, but I have a really hard time because I can't lose myself in the story of it. But then again, he'll give me these like amazing characters, and oftentimes has amazing performances. So that's why I say it's a love-hate. But it kind of illustrates what you're talking about, which is, and I think we're guilty of it as storytellers. A lot of times we want to show how smart we are or how good we are, where if we just provided more oxygen in the room and let characters kind of ask questions and there to be more mystery in it rather than forcing the artifice, I think that oftentimes will be more more compelling. On the other hand, sometimes taking those artifices or making those I love the oh god, I'm gonna forget the name of the damn movie now. It's the one about the crisis, the Big Short.
Mm-hmm.
I love the device in The Big Short where they're using a really attractive woman in a hot tub to teach you about finance because there's backstory there that has to get out, and so they're like, hey, we'll just break the fourth wall and we'll just tell it to you, and
The Pope in the pool.
yeah,
That stuff,
I mean
yeah.
just all that kind of stuff, which was complete artifice but so smart because it really got to a place that otherwise could potentially be really boring. So so that for me literally took me out of the movie, but it took me out of the movie and it said, look, I got to give you some backstory here. So everybody time out. Here's what it is. But they did it in a really fun way.
Yeah.
And I thought that was brilliant directing and brilliant writing,
Troy, I like what you said about the close-ups, being able to tell the story. There's an efficiency there, I think, that everybody just appreciates in storytelling. In the way so real quick, my background, is in visual effects, and I oversaw all the digital faces for Avatar. So I oversaw Jake Avatar, Neytiri, and the whole gang. And then before that, I worked on King Kong's face. And so during that period, over 12 or 13 years, I just studied a lot of Paul Ekman's work, who's a psychologist, and he's categorized. Anyone familiar with Paul Ekman here? Yeah, so he categorized all the muscle triggers with emotional states and how those things are connected, and so the way I've been making this film is, a lot of times there'll be moments where it's just the look that can just tell the story. There's this one moment where he comes home from fighting, and his wife says this big long thing about how she was disappointed, and can you please let me know the next time you're gonna fight? And so there was like this argument, but that was like the first cut of that scene, and then after looking at it, reducing it, that whole last 2.5 minutes of her disappointment and fear, and I just reduced that down to one look. So it's just the close-up of her, and within that one look, within the 3 seconds, you can see everything that she's feeling and how complex that emotion was. So yeah, there's an efficiency, I think. Yeah, that's how I've been able to kind of combine my background in visual effects and all my work on digital faces to documentary filmmaking.
Do you not find that when you do faces and things like that, as complicated as those visual effects are, the fact that they relate in a simpler way than blowing up a building or something that looks spectacular makes it more emotionally true?
Oh, absolutely.
Visual effects in service of story are always more interesting to me
Right.
than just watching.
Yeah. The face, I mean, the eyes and the face, it says, it can say everything. I can also, after a lot of research, tell when, people are generally lying and not being genuine, and that's stuff that you notice, or hamming it up for the camera, and those are things that I'm super in tune with, and if I see that, I just point the camera away and just, I'm not interested. Or when you're cutting the film, you can see these micro expressions and just take them out, and yeah.
There's a super cool thing going on in town right now called living room theater, where basically these 3 actors, you can hire them to come into your living room and they'll put a show on. And the cool thing about it's only like, whatever, you and your friends, 15 friends, and they put on 10 short plays. And the amazing thing about it is they're funny, they're sad, it's a whole mixture of it, but they're so close. I mean, they literally either sit with you or they use whatever architecture's there in the room. And it's like this hour and a half of like amazing, it's like being inside a movie because you're so close to them that it's not presented in a proscenium type, we're the actors, you're the, and it's so compelling, and I think it has to do with the fact that you're so intimate with with them and so close with them. So, yeah.
Well, I think at this point we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. So if you guys have any questions, raise your hand. We have someone coming around with a microphone.
We're going to take our first question from the social media channel.
Okay, sounds good.
Hi, so thank you guys from all the online students, lots of engagement. So Michelle from Music Business asks, what other elements like music, say that, how do they enhance or distract from the story, and how do you decide kind of what you will use or what you won't use in terms of other elements?
Well, especially from the horror world. I mean, it's funny, like Blair had no music. Well, actually, that's not true. Blair had a really, really, really good piece of music in the credits that became kind of our theme thing and touched everything. But then in a more traditional sense, especially in horror, sound design and music oftentimes are the most powerful tools in horror. And I think it's definitely one of those things that can be terribly distracting and terribly destroying of a story, or can completely make a scene, completely transform something. I've definitely gotten into a situation where we've really struggled with a scene, and one of the solutions was bringing in the composer to rough out a piece of music, and we're like, oh, that's how we can do it, you know. And we, I always cut with, the first time I start cutting something, I will go and pick music and lay that down first, even if I get rid of the music altogether. Oftentimes the voice of the music will lead the edit for me personally, that it just works like that. And then oftentimes we'll go back and do that with the composer most of the times. And I always believe in bringing in those types of people, sound effects and music, and edit. Try and bring them in as early as you possibly can afford in the process, because it makes a night and day difference. So
I would tell you that in reality television, things have changed an awful lot over the years. When I did my first show for MTV called Fear, they had a composer by the name of Randall Chrisman that they would take the show to when they had an edit that had been approved, and he would write a score for that show over a period of a couple of days, and then that was our score. We are so reliant on music libraries now, and music is so neglected because of the bottom line and everyone trying to save money, that you start to find on certain networks the musical cue or the music cues on the shows are the same across all the shows. You're hearing the same stings, you're hearing the same things. That to me is so detrimental to the process of what it is that we were trying to do, that I wish that we could just figure out a way to get back to that place where you can afford a little bit of original music now and again. Basketball Wives, they had creative music integration where we had certain songs, like if you remember, there was a song called Bulletproof that was done by LaRue. That's a pop song, admittedly, but that was, once we actually got to use some contemporary things in there, it really helped the show a lot. And VH1 was very smart to look into that as a solution to getting exposure to new music, but also to help the quality of the scoring on the shows. So music is everything.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of cinema, I think it's just a visual and sonic extravaganza. To me, that's cinema. And music is just a tool to communicate emotion and tone and feel and story, most importantly.
Great. Anybody else have a question? There was one right here.
Hi, my name is. Oh wow. Hi, my name is Hunter. I had a question for. I don't remember your name. I'm sorry, for the writer of the Blair Witch Project.
Robin.
Ryan.
Robin.
I'm sorry. I really liked the film. I actually really got into found footage films just because of that film, and I had two questions, and I wondered what inspiration did you had to direct a film like that, like the cinematography and whatnot, and what was the original ending? Because I didn't really like the ending.
Well, first of all, just clarification. I was the producer on the movie. And basically, the 5 guys who made the film, we all went to film school together. And Ed and Dan, who were the co-directors on the film, they had written an outline for the film that they called the Woods movie. And the idea was to do the 70s period piece that would take place there, and we were going to do it traditionally and everything like that. And that's what they talked about in film school. But then we all went our separate ways and had varying degrees of success, but none of us had made a feature film at all. And one of the guys in the interim had gone into the Army and basically we'd gotten back together and said, this is our last chance. We're either going to make this movie or we're not going to make this movie. And we didn't have enough money to do it as a period film. So Greg Hale, who's my producing partner, said, well, when we were in the military, one of the things that happened was they would come in and grab us in the middle of the night and take us to this prisoner of war camp. And then basically for 6 days, short of like breaking bones, they would short you food and, just pretty much terrorize you. And he said, well, what if we did that to actors? And that was really kind of the changing point for Blair Witch Project, because what we did is we used GPSs to essentially, there was an outline, but there was no script. The GPSs, over 8 days, the actors would guide themselves to certain points that they would get to. And they were trained as documentary filmmakers, but had no idea what was going to happen. We basically told them, shoot whatever happens. And so financially, that enabled us to do it, but it also gave us a visceralness and a truth. And the other thing that happened was, and Heather even said, like, at points she had to go, okay, I have a boyfriend, I live in New York, you know, this is just a movie. The other thing that happened was that digital editing really happened. And we cut our film on a Media 100, which was the first tool that became affordable for us to do digital editing because of that design, we had so much footage. And Blair, if Blair deserves any praise, it's for the fact that, you know, it was a year of slogging through. In that way, it was very much like a documentary. It was slogging through all of these things that had happened over 8 days, real time, and really crafting a story out of that footage. So, you know, speaking about how story evolves, what we set out to do in Blair and actually what became Blair were vastly, vastly different. And it really evolved over, you know, 3 years.
We have a question in the back.
Hello, my name is Brian Barbosa, and I'm in music production, so I have 2 questions, if that's okay. My first one is, when you have to tell a story, you guys said you condense it into 90 minutes because you guys do film, but since I'm doing music, how would I condense a story into like 3 to 2 minutes? Like, what parts would you take and what parts would you not take? How do you figure that out? And then my second question is it good to have a specific audience or just a broad audience?
Well, with music, as with anything else, if you're trying to tell a story, just be purpose-driven, have a beginning, a middle, and an end. I know that sounds crazy. Watch, you know, you can get inspiration from anywhere. If you watch a really good short film, there's a lot of them that are in the 3 to 5 minute category, and you can just sort of see how they handle the business that they do. And when you write your song, you know, when you write a piece of music, just look at that. Even if you're just writing a piece of music that doesn't have lyrics, there are builds and rests and bridges and things that sort of help you to readjust or to, you know, put your brain in a different place and different points in a piece of music. I'll answer that one. Someone else can answer the other one.
I'll do it. To me, I'm not a musician, so it's hard for me to answer this question. But to me, an audience is really important with music because of the extreme diversity, complexity, and you know, music is so powerful and can go in so many different forms that even if that audience is just yourself, to me, you're trying to, I think the more, in a weird way, and the more specific you can be, it's better with music because music is more general. Does that make sense? Like it's
A little bit. I think that, like, when I'm a big fan of Tom Waits and Leonard Cohen and people that I think are super effective storytellers in music because it's almost like they're doing a spoken word piece in a lot of cases. I'd listen to a lot of them just because, for me, you know, just as a person who experiences a lot of music, I play ukulele. You can't tell a lot of stories with that thing. But once you hear other people who've done it effectively, as with any other thing, you find people who are really great at it, and then you just teach yourself to sort of mimic that. But your personality will leak into it. It's sort of like doing an impression of another person. You're never going to completely be that other person. You're going to have a weird take on it. If you try to imitate an announcer's voice, suddenly you get good at doing an announcer's voice, but you're not that other person.
I'm actually really interested in hearing your ukulele storytelling.
Yeah, me too.
I'm into that.
I don't think you want that.
And we have our last question in the back.
Hey, I was wondering about when people have to tell a story, keeping in mind the people who are paying for the story, that they can't always comment on social commentary because they have a fear that it'll get pulled? And based on that, do you think that certain podcasts and live stand-up comedy is one of the last true ways to really dig in without fear of being called out on it? Or
I think that a lot of times you can get away with a parable pretty well. I have a tremendous amount of respect for comedy when it's done well, because I think comedians are really the folks who people engage with the most now. I mean, the fact that more people were using Jon Stewart as a news source than anything else was kind of a strange thought. But I do think that if you don't say a thing but you create a parable of that thing, the parable is often more palatable because it's mildly open to interpretation, but the people who are already leaning in that direction that want to be involved with you can follow that story and go, oh, I know what that's about. Then you can kind of get away with a little bit more.
Can you clarify your question? I didn't understand what you're saying about the strengths of podcasts. What?
Yeah, just sometimes I listen to a lot of podcasts, and they are able to truly speak their mind without worrying. Yeah, without being maybe called out on it, you know. So my question is there a way to, and you kind of touched on it with the parable, is there a way to really dig in, and maybe with document you are able to?
Are you speaking about when you're crafting something for mainstream media, you can't always speak honestly?
Yeah.
Or you might be restricted by your investors or producers or executives who might ask you to rein in your message a little bit?
Yeah, so how do you tiptoe around that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do think we live in I think we live in an amazing time for media. Honestly, like, I am very, very optimistic about media because there are so many different ways that people can express themselves, and whether it's, you know, I'm not a huge Twitter user, but I am a Facebook thing, and I love storytelling, obviously, like straight up storytelling, and radio podcasts are kind of that, you know, it's one step more sophisticated than straight storytelling. And I think it's one of the reasons why I started Orlando Story Club was because I love the speed, the honesty, the rawness of it, the cost, you know, it's free. And so I love the immediacy of that. So as somebody who loves story, that was very, very accessible. So I do think we live in a really wonderful time for that. On the other hand, you know, there were, you know, even Star Wars, like, it's so funny, like, you look at that movie and the sophistication of the digital effects and the world that it creates, like, it's insane, the technology that's going into every frame of that. And so I think we're blessed to live in a world where you can have raw podcasts and truthful telling and all of that kind of thing, but you can also have, you know, ridiculous movies that show you things that were never, ever physically possible to show you before. So it's a great time.
Yeah, you were kind of mentioning that something like a podcast would allow someone to express themselves more honestly. All they're doing is sharing their opinion, right? What is truth? Like, we can get in a whole big conversation about what is true and what is false. But yeah, you know, and I think with me, I mean, I love metaphor. I'm just like crazy about it. So if I have an opinion and I feel very strongly about this opinion, I can communicate it in either just by flat out telling you my opinion, or I can communicate it through metaphor. And when you do that, I think then it becomes, you allow your audience to try to interpret what that means. And then the most ideal scenario is that everybody, through that metaphor, brings their own life experience to it, and it makes for like interactive storytelling. I mean, those are the kind of things that I love. I love being able to communicate through metaphor versus exposition, you know, or my
Yeah.
flat out opinion on something, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I love what you're talking about in that my favorite kind of storytelling is participatory. So whether
Absolutely.
it's a podcast or a movie, I
Yes.
like things where the filmmaker is obviously very aware that there's an audience there,
Yep.
and they're leaving certain things for that audience to either figure out or interpret or whatever, and so there's a lot more mystery versus pontificating. Like that's the danger with podcasts.
Yes.
Is that somebody gets on there and just like, this is my opinion, and it's like, okay, well, great, and congratulations.
The best films are the ones that you leave with your buddies, and all you guys are doing is talking about these different scenes and what the scene meant to you and to me, and I went through this in my life, and I think he meant this, and that's awesome. That's when it's like really, really fun. The worst case is that you finish the film and everyone looks at their watch and goes, all right, what's for dinner? Where are we going? Like that's terrible. Like I would, it should be interactive.
Yeah, and maybe if surprise was one of the elements that we talk about, mystery is another element that I think is so key to storytelling.
Definitely, yeah.
Well, I think that's all the time we have. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Once again, Jeff Unai.
Thank you.
Troy DeVold. And Robin Cowie. Thank you guys for staying late. Have a great day. Enjoy the rest of Hall of Fame.